Welcome to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills, where we present clear thinking on confusing topics in challenging times. Today is President's Day, 2025, February 17th. And earlier today, I was at the Santa Cruz County building, the federal building and the courthouse building, where people had gathered in great numbers to protest Elon Musk and Donald Trump and their ransacking generally of our democracy. I have an interview with Adam Spickler from that protest. And Adam Spickler is the Cabrillo College trustee who also happens to be the first trans man to be elected to public office in the state of California. Here's our interview.
I'm worried about funding for our community colleges. Are you worried about funding?
Yes. On Thursday this past week, our college received our first Dear Colleague letter from the Department of Education targeting our Hispanic Serving Institution grants and the DEI aspects of them. Yeah. So we were told that further instruction would be forthcoming, but at the very least, we need to start categorizing and cataloging all of our DEI-related activities.
Wow.
Totally funded.
And what would that be even?
We receive about $4 million in what's called Hispanic Serving Institute grants from the federal government. They fund a couple of specific programs at Cabrillo where we have direct transfer pathways for our Latinx students in certain studying fields. And my apologies, I'm not remembering. It's largely medically related fields to go directly from Cabrillo to CSUMB.
And so it might be that funding is threatened.
It potentially could be, yes.
But it sounds like any DEI program you have at the college needs to be reported.
Yes.
Okay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, folks, is what we're talking about. And as a trans person, you've expressed dismay and even some despair around what's happening. And how are you feeling right now? And what do you think about the attacks on trans individuals in this country?
Well, it's really, I have been out as a trans person for 14, almost 15 years now, and I've experienced a little bit of discrimination in my life. I absolutely have. But I can't tell you what it feels like to wake up to your president and your federal administration directly targeting you and trying to erase you. I mean, unless you've been in a minoritized group that's been targeted for extreme hatred and erasure, I can't even explain to you what this feels like. It's pretty devastating. It's pretty terrifying. And knowing that this type of fascism is being replicated from fascism in our history, in our world's history, and where those roads have led is pretty darn terrifying.
This happened in Germany at the beginning of the Nazi era. I understand they shut down any sexual study institutes that were working with trans people and studying gender. And there was actually a lot of amazing intellectual pursuit and study of trans people at that time, and gay people and queer people. And that was one of the first things to go.
Yes, no, that is absolutely accurate. And something that history doesn't talk about nearly as much, the Holocaust is most known for the horrific deaths of 6 million Jews. And as a Jew, I'm grateful that our history keeps that information alive. What's little known to most people is that the second largest population of people who were rounded up, camped, and exterminated were LGBTQ people. The pink triangle that's known so well in LGBTQ communities is because that is the symbol gay people were forced to wear at the camps during the Holocaust to show that they were gay.
It was like the yellow star.
Yeah.
For gay people, LGBTQ plus people.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, we're in a difficult time. It's heartening to see. I think there are about 400 people here, I'd say. And does this lift your spirits a little bit? What do you think we should be doing?
I feel held in a more of a way than I typically do walking through the world these days. I'm fortunate at the job that I have. My day job is I'm a senior analyst with our county's Human Services Department. The people I work with and for are incredibly supportive and understanding, and we're rolling up our sleeves to make sure we're making every last-ditch effort we can to fight for federal funding to continue for the programs we administer at the county, and that's an important fight as well. But I also individually, I feel really held up. So on a day-to-day basis, that's what gets me through. Showing up here, it's a whole different level of feeling held up. It's important.
Thank you, Adam Spickler.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate you being here.
That was Adam Spickler, Cabrillo College trustee and the first trans man to be elected to public office in the state of California. And this was a protest in front of the county building in Santa Cruz. Protesters, there were so many, they were spilling onto the street and onto the median and onto the other side of the street. I counted 400 at one point, and then the crowd got bigger. And so I started to calculate maybe 500, 600. Someone said 1,000 possibly. I don't know quite how to count a crowd like that, but it was pretty big, and people were very energized. And this was to protest all of Trump's executive orders and the white supremacy and the anti-LGBTQ plus and the anti-DEI initiatives, and also Elon Musk running around trying to fire practically any federal employee that he can target. And as they're doing this and trying to cut budgets, they're also trying to continue Trump's tax cuts for the very wealthy and for corporations. Tesla paid $0 in taxes in the last fiscal year, if you can believe it. And of course, Elon Musk receives billions of dollars in federal subsidies for his companies every year. I want to just read something really quickly from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. You can find this on the internet, 2025 Budget Stakes. This is about the Trump tax cuts that they're trying to continue. They were set to expire this year, and then they want to add more tax cuts for wealthy people. And this is the summary from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. High-income households and profitable corporations would grow even wealthier under Republican proposals for trillions of dollars in new or extended tax cuts, even as Republican proposals for trillions of dollars of cuts to health assistance, food assistance, and other programs would leave more children in poverty, more families without stable housing, and more people without health coverage. Families would also face an additional burden, higher prices for many basic goods due to the tariffs that President Trump has begun to impose, which would act as a large tax increase actually on U.S. consumers. So that's what people were protesting today. And on to today's show and the main topic, which is the roots of the migration crisis with Dr. Ann Lopez, Executive Director at the Center for Farm Worker Families based in Watsonville and serving Central Coast farm workers. The center is a nonprofit that aims to improve the lives of Mexican-American binational farmers and their families while educating the public about the intense hardships and inequalities they experience. The center works directly with farmers and communities to carry out projects in Mexico and California, including funding, support structures, and educational resources. Prior to her position as executive director at the CFF, Lopez was a professor at San Jose City College, where she taught biology and environmental science courses. She was hired in 1969 and is now retired from that profession. She is credited as a prominent figure in the creation of the university's environmental science program. In 2007, the University of California Press published Lopez's book titled The Farm Worker's Journey. The book documents the roots of the migrant crisis from Mexico into the United States, especially post-North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and includes 10 years' worth of interviews Lopez conducted with farmers throughout Mexico and California. Farm Worker's Journey, the book, also includes her own research on commercial agriculture and how these farmers are taken advantage of. In her book, Lopez depicts a world hidden from most U.S. Americans, a world of inescapable poverty that has worsened considerably since NAFTA was implemented in 1994. Lopez is a recipient of the Cesar E. Chavez Community Award from the city of Watsonville, California, the Democratic Ideals Award from the Crosson North County Democratic Club, the National Association of Professional Women's Woman of the Year Award for the 29th Assembly District of California, and there's more. It would be a very long bio to get into everything. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you, Amy. I'm delighted to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me tonight.
Yeah, I thought it was very important given what we're seeing in terms of what I see as a shift in the Overton window around immigration and migration. We were talking before the show about the numbers. Actually, the numbers aren't any higher than they were in 2007 in terms of the numbers of immigrants or migrants who are undocumented in this country. And yet it feels like there's this mass hysteria around it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you first, because you have such an interesting story. You were in environmental work. And how did you come to be so interested in agriculture and farm workers?
Well, I've always been a nature lover and liked being out in the woods and outdoors anywhere in the world. And I've always been interested in organic farming, which oftentimes seeks to mimic the processes of nature and not use pesticides and harmful additions to the farming region. So it's always been an interest. And when I was going to do my a topic for my dissertation, I thought it would be interesting to study the farming processes of the people in Mexico, the farmers in Mexico, before they came here and migrated here. So I took my information and knowledge about agroecology to Mexico and compared it with what I learned from the farmers there. And one thing led to the other, and that's how I got involved with it.
Are you also Mexican?
I'm half. I'm biracial.
Okay.
My father's Mexican, and he was very adamant about supporting Mexican farm workers. In fact, when I'd leave the house with a new lecture or something, he would always say, "Give them hell."
That explains a lot.
Yeah, there you go. I don't need to say any more.
We're talking with Dr. Ann Lopez, the author of The Farm Worker's Journey, and you are listening to KSQD at 89.5, oh, hang on a second, 90.7, 89.7, and 89.5 FM. We will be right back after this brief message from our underwriter.
KSQD thanks GPI Builders for supporting this program. GPI Builders is a locally owned and operated full-service construction company with more than 10 years of experience and expertise. GPI Builders specializes in home additions, ADUs, and residential remodels throughout the Bay Area. For more information, 1-800-916-8343 or gpibuilders.com. Thank you, GPI Builders, for supporting community radio, K-Squid.
Welcome back to our program, Moment of Truth, with Amy Chen Mills and also with Dr. Ann Lopez, who is the director of the Center for Farm Worker Families and the author of the book Farm Worker's Journey. We're talking about the origins of what's called the migration crisis. I mean, I think crisis is sort of a judgmental word. We don't know if it is a crisis when we actually depend on people who come here to work in the fields and in construction and everywhere else. And so I wanted to get into the history of this crisis with you because you wrote about this in your book, Ann Lopez. And so tell me what you found about why all of a sudden so many people from Mexico started to come here right after NAFTA. And, and I'll just add that Mexico is the largest group of people that do migrate to the United States.
Right. Well, for 7,000 to 9,000 years we're aware of, the rural farmers in Mexico depended on the corn, bean, and squash intercrop. That supported generations and generations of people. And in the process of growing the corn in particular, they would hand select the corn. And so over time, the corn would become genetically adapted to whatever that environment was. And Mexico became the corn genetic repository for the world. So anybody anywhere in the world that had problems with corn could go to Mexico, find a comparable environment, cross their sick corn with the Mexican corn, and that usually solved the problem. So it was very important to maintain that genetic purity. And so where the problem started was with the North American Free Trade Agreement, because the Mexican government protected these farmers in Mexico with tariffs at the border. So if you wanted to bring a truckload of corn from the U.S. into Mexico to sell it, you'd have to stop at the border, get weighed, and then you'd be charged a huge tariff, and you'd realize that you couldn't make a profit, so you just turn around and keep your corn in the U.S. And that's how the corn in Mexico was protected. What happened is, with the development of the World Trade Organization, a lot of the people on that, and I never was able to find who they were specifically, but they made the decision that the way the corn is grown in Mexico, with the corn, bean, and squash intercrop, was, quote, inefficient. And there are more efficient ways to grow it. And since the U.S. had attained corn superiority in the world, the idea was to make the farmers leave their land, go to the border area and work in the maquiladoras, or the huge machine shops there, and then we would supply Mexico with all its corn. And so that's what happened. It took it was supposed to take 15 years to phase out the tariffs and allow the farmers to find new employment. In fact, it was all done in 30 months. I was in Mexico and I saw the confusion and just the chaos. And so almost immediately, tons and tons of our genetically modified corn started being dumped into Mexico, undercutting the price that the farmers in Mexico had once received. So now they're pretty much unemployed. And they didn't have many choices. One would be to stay on your farm and hope that you don't starve. That was one. And I met two families that I interviewed that were in that boat. They said, we've been here for generations, we're not leaving. Another would be to go to a large city and try to find work and send money home to the family on the farm. And if you go to Guadalajara or Mexico City, you go up in a plane and the city is ringed with shanty towns of all these displaced farmers. And then the third option is to make an undocumented border crossing to the U.S. and start working in farm work. So that's where the current farm worker population has come from. About 60 to 70% of farm workers in the state are undocumented. I call them refugees of NAFTA. And what's not discussed is the inordinate pain and suffering this binational population went through as some members left, leaving behind family, leaving behind loved ones that they may never see again, etc. And that really triggered something in me. I just thought, this kind of cruelty is not acceptable.
Yeah. Now, did these farmers own the land that they were farming? What happened to the land? Did they own it to begin with, or were they leasing it, or what was happening with that land?
They had, I've forgotten the whole process, but they had what were called ejidos. And it was like a communal farming process where they all worked together in a given area and, to grow their crops.
Okay, and maybe they own the land together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So then do you know what happened to the land, or was that part of your research?
Well, first of all, at least initially, the family tried to keep it. That's why they sent somebody else off, or somebody came here and sent money home, etc. And I think eventually a lot of them just sold the land because it was just too burdensome to not be there and be actually working with it.
Right, and not be able to make any money off of it.
Exactly.
To pay for it. So the idea was to push these people, these farmers who, any farmer in the United States, let's say a white farmer, an Anglo farmer, they are so fierce about loving their profession and loving the land. So I would hope that people could hear what we're talking about if they were, let's say, Anglo farmers and understand what it means to be forced to leave land that you've been working.
And these people in Mexico, I would go to explore. They would give me a tour of their land. They knew where every rock was on their land, where the shadows came at different times of the day, where the insects are more likely to congregate, what kind of weeds might grow over here. I was amazed at how they knew about every single square inch of the land they own. It was very impressive.
And so I guess part of the rationale for NAFTA was we need labor in
Yes.
these manufacturing plants at the border on the Mexican side, or both.
Actually, I think it's both, but I think we imported a lot from these maquiladoras into the U.S.
Okay, so the maquiladoras were these manufacturing plants.
Centers, yeah.
Centers. Okay, gotcha. I mean, what a life to go from working the land, being outside, knowing the insects, knowing the rocks, to probably being forced into a factory-like situation 12
That's
hours
right.
a day or whatever the heck it was.
And no one ever asked these farmers if they were okay leaving, or if they would vote for this. No one ever gave them that option.
Right.
It was forced on them.
And then what were the numbers? So before NAFTA, how many people were immigrating to the United States to work from Mexico, and then how many after?
Well, I know that there were about 4 million undocumented people in the U.S. prior to NAFTA. After NAFTA went into effect, there were 11 million, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think people have to realize is that NAFTA is a trade agreement within the context of the neoliberal economy. And the neoliberal economy is based on exploited labor, deregulation, privatization, getting rid of public services like education. And then if somebody can't make it in the NAFTA or the neoliberal economy, what do you do with them? You blame them. And of course, we can see that with the homeless situation. Almost anybody who can't make enough money to buy food and have a roof over their head is just blamed and ignored, basically. And then of course farm workers are blamed for coming here in the first place when we are the ones that promoted their fleeing Mexico. I hope everybody understands that they did not come here by choice.
Yeah.
They were forced to come here to survive. This is survival.
Yeah, and who wants to leave their country?
Yeah, and their farm that's been in their family for generations. I mean, really.
It's a difficult thing to do. A new culture, a new language, very little power. And I just wanted to read some statistics from the Pew Center. These are statistics from 2022, but I think they're relevant because that was considered the peak of most recent immigration numbers, and yet not as high as in 2007. So these are not historically high immigration numbers from Mexico or from anywhere else, actually. It says here the number of unauthorized immigrants from Mexico dropped to 4 million in 2022. This is just Mexican unauthorized, quote unquote, immigrants, from a peak of 6.9 million in 2007. And Mexico has long been and remains the most common country of birth for unauthorized immigrants. But the numbers have actually gone down, and so somehow we're all freaked out. Lord knows why, and I think that the Republicans have been very effective at scaring everybody. When in fact we know that a lot of, or actually undocumented people in this country commit far less crime, or they commit statistically less crime. I'm not sure how far less crime, but than citizens do.
That's
or
right.
permanent residents do. And that makes sense, because why do you want to commit crimes? You could get busted and you could get deported.
Absolutely.
So you'd be more fearful of committing crimes. So I always tell people, if you think about it, if you mix in more undocumented people in our country, actually statistically, maths-wise, the crime rate would go down. If you think about it, really, logically, right?
Right.
So, and I also want to say, as of 2022, these are just some facts that I think are interesting. Unauthorized immigrants represented 3.3% of the total U.S. population and 23% of the foreign-born population. These shares were lower than the peak values in 2007, but slightly higher than in 2019. So no big whoop, really.
Yeah.
And 3.3, it's a very small percentage. I know, it's crazy. And so now we've got Donald Trump saying we're going to do this mass deportation. It seems to me that the agricultural industry, at least, if not construction, if not hospitality, if not all these other industries, right, rely on undocumented labor.
Yes.
Yes? And
100%.
So it's part of our economy. And people will say to me from the MAGA side, like, but why don't they just do it legally? And so I'm like, I think there's a reason why we're not letting them do it legally, why we're not giving them citizenship status or residency. Tell us why.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a way to keep them from not having legal status. But I worked with a farm worker who she was undocumented and had 4 children who were all citizens. And I used to lose sleep at night thinking about her being deported and all of them going into separate households. And so I got her an attorney. And it took her, I think it was 7 years and like $15,000 to get a green card. Well, now, a lot of people aren't going to put in that kind of effort. And the attorney was over in San Jose, so involved a commute. But it's hard work to get any kind of legal status, and yet it makes no sense because we're completely dependent on them for the food supply. Without farm workers, there is no food supply, at least that's cost effective, so to speak. And what I think should happen is we should give them a work permit. Anybody who works weeks, months, and years bent over in the field doing this kind of labor and living on the edge of poverty as a result should not have to worry about deportation. It makes no sense. Give them a work permit and thank them for doing this grueling work. And having a life expectancy of only 49 to 51 years. I mean, this is really no way to treat human beings.
Yeah. And speaking of what we're up against these days, I just want to mention that we had this protest today on President's Day. On February 28th, there was an economic blackout protest, no spending. Some people are doing no tech, no computers, no phones for 24 hours from 12 a.m. on February 28th. March 7th through 14th, there's a no buying from Amazon boycott. And Friday, March 14th, a national strike, no work for 24 hours. And these are, I don't even know who's calling these. In some ways, it might be better not to know. You can probably find them online. We will put some information up at the Substack Moment of Truth Dispatch in the coming week or weeks. There are ongoing boycotts of Target and Amazon and other corporations that support this administration. Reach out to Showing Up for Racial Justice Santa Cruz Indivisible, YAR, Your Allied Rapid Response Network, and many more. And actually reach out to the Center for Farm Worker Families. We're sitting here in the studio with Dr. Ann Lopez, who is the director of the Center for Farm Worker Families. And we're talking about migration and what are the roots of migration. It's not like people just one day up and decide, you know what, I want to make this horrible journey in which I may die. My children may die. And then I'll be living in a state of, quote, illegality, right, unquote, in this country where I could be deported at any moment. People don't just say, I'm going to go do that to take advantage of the system, right? Which is what sort of people are thinking right now. I mean, I don't know a lot about immigration, which is why I really wanted to talk to you. And I've been reaching out to other people to come onto the show with us. Are agricultural companies and hospitality companies, and are these industries sort of colluding to make sure that people don't get legal status?
I don't know that I've heard that part of it. And to be honest, we don't deal a lot with the farmers directly. Some people have said we're in the trenches with the farm workers in their community. So I don't know what the thinking is, but I do know that, for instance, Lakeside Organics is very humane toward farm workers, whereas they're treated as if they don't matter. That's my assessment of it anyway.
For other companies.
Yeah, I think for any company that hires them, they just don't matter. And in terms of agriculture, there's no oversight oftentimes where they work. Women, there's a 60% chance that they'll be sexually harassed, groped, or outright raped in the field. Somebody asked me, do they bring in prostitutes for the farm workers? And I thought they don't have to, because they can just, it's pretty much a free-for-all a lot of times. And I've had women call me hysterical because they've just been sexually abused. And again, there's no oversight. The same with heat or exposure, where they're exposed to these high temperatures, and one of them will call and say, it's 108 in the field and we're starting to faint, and the grower won't let us go. That kind of thing. So I don't think that farm workers matter, to be honest, and I think that's tragic. In terms of criminality, that's what's being used now to make them sound so bad that we should deport them all. I've met very few in 25 years of working directly with farm workers in the community. I have met so very few that have any kind of a criminal past or history at all. In fact, to me, there's probably less chance than in the regular society that we have. We find more of that kind of thing here. So I think that's a smokescreen to get the public behind the whole MAGA idea of getting rid of all the undocumented people. I would really like to know what Trump thinks, or where Trump thinks that the nation's food supply is going to come from, because the entire industrial agricultural system is completely dependent on farm worker labor. So if anything, we need to reform the labor situation for farm workers so they're not living in abject poverty. In this area in Central California, the average farm worker makes about $25,000 a year. Well, rents are $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month, and there's exactly half as much housing available for the population of farm workers. In other words, we need about 90,000 farm workers, and we have about half that much housing for them. I think I read a statistic of 4.3 people per toilet in their community. So, this kind of abusive situation needs to be corrected. It's typical of the neoliberal economy, but that needs to change.
Mm-hmm. It was something for me. I feel like you can kind of pull any thread. People say, we need to talk about capitalism, or we need to talk about racism, or we need to talk about the patriarchy. And I sort of feel like they're all combined, or white supremacy. And, for me, it's like, it just makes perfect sense. I started, connect the dots, I suppose, in my own mind a while back, where I was like, you need, if you're going to abuse workers and pay them very little, and not give them health care and not give them benefits, and then racism helps you a lot in that regard, right? Yeah. Because now these are people, they're brown, and they're the masses of people in the fields, and so who cares? Who's going to think about if we continue to call them criminals, and then who's going to care about them? And so anything can happen to them. I'm deeply concerned that they're being sent to Guantanamo. I'm deeply concerned that there's legislation in one state, I think it's Missouri, to actually put people in prison for life There's legislation for the death penalty now, that's been raised in Washington, D.C. for people who commit crimes, capital crimes, quote unquote, who are undocumented. But the racism involved is so... Why would they be singled out for the death penalty? And heaven forbid we should bring the death penalty back for anybody in this country when we've made such progress.
Exactly. No, I think that's a good point.
Yeah. And so you also talk about binationalism.
Yeah.
So tell us, you have this program called Farm Worker Reality Tour, and you can find this at the Center for Farm Worker Families website. Mm-hmm. Is that centerforfarmworkerfamilies.org?
Farmworkerfamily.org.
Okay, yeah. Farmworkerfamily.org.
Right.
And I went on this tour a while back, and we got to see some of the housing that's available to farm workers, I guess whether they're documented or not. And tell us what the life is like of a farm worker family who is working in our local fields. And we produce a lot of agriculture here in the Salinas Valley and in Pajaro.
Right. The family structure is pretty much the same as any other family structure in the society. However, living in abject poverty, the owners of the houses that they rent oftentimes, in fact, I would say most of the time, do not take care of their property at all. So we had to replace a flooring for a family because they could slip and hurt themselves. No window coverings or anything, windows broken, that kind of thing. And so if they don't want to pay for it and don't have somebody that will, they have to live with it that way. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is they're just... They pretty much keep to themselves as a community, because if they go outside, they feel targeted. And so it's, a very uncomfortable life in that sense. The parents want nothing more than their children to become educated and out of farm work. And we have had a victory in the migrant camps in the state. I don't know if you're aware of the 50-mile regulation in the state. There's 24 different migrant camps, and there used to be a regulation that when the migrants left, they had to take everything out of the units and move at least 50 miles away if they wanted to come back to the same unit. And the units in the migrant camp are the least expensive and probably the best housing that farm workers can find. So there's a tremendous desire to hold on to that. But they have to leave in April. Then they have to move 50 miles away, and then they come back in the fall at some point, they have to come in April, start the harvest season, and then they leave in the winter for about 3 or 4 months, and then moving 50 miles away.
Where do they go?
Various places. Some of them, there's a place right on Highway 5 that's exactly 50 miles away, and then there's
from a camp
from the Buena Vista migrant camp.
So there are 24 in the state of California.
There's 24 migrant camps.
Yes. 24 migrant camps,
right.
And then they have to move out.
Yep.
Does someone move into that unit?
No.
It just stays empty?
It's empty the whole time they're gone.
What is the point of this rule?
I have been asking that question for over 10 years. In fact, I went to Sacramento on 7 occasions and talked to people in housing and community development. What is the purpose of the 50-mile regulation? No one ever gave me an answer. So luckily, Joaquin Arambula, who's an assembly person in Northern California, introduced legislation to get rid of it. And we finally got rid of the 50-mile regulation. Now, the people can't live there continuously yet, But that's probably the next piece of legislation, to upgrade the units so that you don't have water seeping through the walls and other things. See, like I said, the housing is not maintained for farm workers.
And it seems like a low number, 24, actually, migrant camps. We went to see one on your tour. It wasn't huge. It was, I don't know how many units there were there, maybe 50 or something.
No, I think it's around 114.
Okay, 114. If they're all that size, it's not a lot.
No.
Now, first of all, I have to say that you are listening to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. We're interviewing Dr. Ann Lopez, the director of the Center for Farm Worker Families and the author of the book, The Farm Worker's Journey, on immigration and migrants from Mexico in particular. And you are listening to us on KSQD and KSQT in Santa Cruz and Prunedale, 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM. So let's go back to these farm workers. So do some of them go back to Mexico?
Yes.
Okay. Is that part of this? There was a Bracero program. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Is that still in operation? That's where people have some legal status to come and work, or not?
Well, yes. And in fact, all the people in the migrant camp have some kind of legal status.
Okay.
Yeah, so that part of it is good, but the fact that they have to leave and their kids go to at least 2 schools. I met a couple of families where the children went to 4 different schools in 2 countries and 2 languages. And so what happens is they fall further and further behind. And then the kids end up joining gangs, or else, joining gangs, or else they become farm workers like their parents, which is what their parents do not want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
I see.
Yeah, but some of them actually have been doing the commute so long that they own places in Mexico.
Okay.
And my benevolent side, when I ask the question, what is the purpose of is that maybe this encouraged the former farm workers before whole families were migrating. Maybe this encouraged them to go back to their families in Mexico. But no one ever gave me a straight answer. So now we luckily don't have to deal with that.
Okay. But so you're saying that the people who can stay in these camps are the ones who have some documentation.
Yes.
And then there's like all these other people, you're saying maybe 80% of our state, and we are a huge agricultural state, of our state farm worker labor force that is undocumented.
Right.
And in some counties like Kern County, where they actually did show up at some of the fields, or at least were threatening to, people aren't showing up to pick oranges and vegetables and crops.
Right.
Now let's come back closer to home, where we have the Paro Valley and we have the Salinas Valley. So far, not a lot of raids, from what I understand.
Right.
But tell us how people are feeling.
People are terrified. It's just created a wave of intense fear throughout the community. And luckily, there's kind of it's both on the internet, but among different groups, that once somebody sees some migra, the word gets around really quick. But still, it was bad before. I mean, it was bad before, being undocumented and being threatened with deportation. Now that's increased like 10 times. So they live in constant fear. And I'm worried that next month they won't come to pick up the food. And I just don't know where they're going to get food from, because this is the time of year when they can't work. There's the crops are just emerging at this point, so they're not working. They have no money, and I just don't want to see people starving. Period.
Yeah. So you have like a food distribution program, and you were saying that normally you'd get 300 people there. Last month you got
175, yeah.
So people are afraid.
They are afraid. I mean, I was surprised that many came, to be honest, yeah. But yeah, they're afraid. It's really cruel. It's inhuman. It's despicable, and it needs to change.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, it seems to me, life is hard enough
Yes.
for these people. And now to be in terror. And then also, the Trump administration is coming out with new, either an executive order or legislation, I don't remember which, to make it harder to get children out of detention and into a family, family carers that have some documentation. They did this last time with family separation and keeping
Right.
kids in detention for a long time. It just strikes me that there's so much cruelty.
Cruelty. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's just every piece is terrible. Yeah, from, being forced off your land to come here. Then you try to work and make a living and make this society better by harvesting food for everybody. And then that's made cruelly worse, too. It's disgraceful. Yeah, we need a change.
Yeah, I just want to mention the Sustainable Systems Research Foundation because they've been supporting some of these farm workers to get their own pieces of land, either purchased or leased, and become farmers again, and are in particular organic farmers. SSRF and Ronnie Lipschitz, one of our hosts, is the founder of that organization, Sustainable Systems Research Foundation. They're supporting farm workers to become actual farmers again in the United States. Also, I want you to talk about the pesticides and the CORA program, or the CORA initiative that you are involved with, and I've been tracking, whenever I can. Your meetings are on Mondays, so which is when our radio show is.
Makes it hard.
Yeah. But I know that pesticides are being sprayed on fields that are very close to schools, if not adjacent to schools, in the Watsonville area.
Yes.
And the Watsonville City Council voted to, I think, have at least a mile wide buffer zone, which I don't know how much they can control what's happening with these agricultural companies. What's happening now with this, I think it's called Committee for Organic and Regenerative Agriculture?
Right. Well, I mean, for me, it all started when I started my research, and I would go out and visit farm workers in whatever dwelling they were living in, and I was appalled at the number of families that had young kids with leukemia and with bone cancer, brain cancer, learning disabilities, ADHD, you name it. And I mean, I thought, this is an epidemic. Why isn't anybody doing anything? And then I found out about the levels of pesticide use and the kinds of pesticides. So since 2018, a consistent 1 million pounds of pesticides have been applied in Santa Cruz County every year, and a record 67% of them are fumigant gases that can travel for miles. So, for instance, in Watsonville, they use a lot of 1,3-dichloropropene, or talone. It's a carcinogen and a fumigant. It can travel 7 miles, which is all of Watsonville. So if you're near a field and have your window open in the summertime, you're going to get exposed. 98.5% of the pesticides associated with childhood leukemia and 95.2% of pesticides tied to childhood brain cancer were applied in Watsonville alone. So Watsonville just gets saturated. Compared to any other county in the state, Monterey County has a higher percentage of schools and students in areas with the greatest pesticide use, affecting 29 schools and 18,525 students. And Monterey County ranches and farms applied over 2 million pounds of chlorpicrin, a toxic air contaminant, and over 700,000 pounds of 1,3-dichloropropene, a carcinogen, and 2 highly restricted pesticides. And then the third most commonly used is metamsodium, And this one's a toxic air contaminant and a fumigant and a carcinogen. In general, Latino school children are 3.2 times more likely than white students to attend schools with the highest use of the most hazardous pesticides. And the word for this is environmental racism.
Yeah. If people want to support the Center for Farm Worker Families and this initiative to remove pesticides, at least from near the schools in Watsonville, how do they reach out to you?
You can email me, Ann@farmworkerfamily.org. That would be one. You can donate online if you like.
At farmworkerfamily.org. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
And you can come on a farm worker reality tour and become educated. It's very important. And we're just now booking them for starting in April. So you can go on the website and sign up. If you have 10 people or more, we'll do a reality tour with you. Yeah, and those are the main things. And if we all get together and put pressure on the government, in fact, we're planning a protest with Dolores Huerta in the spring, and I hope all of you come.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ann Lopez from the Center for Farm Worker Families, author of the book, The Farm Worker Journey. Thank you for the copy that you just gave me, and thank you for coming into the studio to speak with us tonight.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Please join me tomorrow, folks, on a joint Computer Man Moment of Truth show on personal cybersecurity under tech authoritarianism at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And in light of Elon Musk's massive data breach and theft of all our personal information from formerly secure U.S. federal agencies, what do we do about that? We're going to ask right here on KSQD. We're going to ask about Signal. We're going to ask about Proton Mail. We're going to ask about what's safe to talk about, whatever we want to talk about on right now, and what is not. Now, I am going to encourage all of you who love and support this show, Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills, to please do us a favor and rate us on Spotify or Apple. Subscribe and like and comment on our KSQD podcast stream on YouTube. This helps get the word out and boosts our show in the algorithms. Moment of Truth gives thanks to our team, Nyanko Nyasu, sound and tech engineer, and our research and production team, Nyanko, Mei-Ling Obinata, Joy Schendeldecker, Vara Ramakrishnan, and Todd Zimmerman. Todd of Nativerse Studios created the theme song. Kathy Krizik created our logo. Find our podcast of this show and many others, all the others, at all your favorite podcast sites under Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. And please, as I said, like, subscribe, rate, and share our podcast. This really helps spread the good word. Detailed episode notes and links to our sources and further resources are located at our program pages at www.ksqd.org. Thanks to Howard Feldstein and the entire KSQD team on the California Central Coast where this show originates. Thank you for tuning into Moment of Truth. Please contact us at Amy, A-M-I, at ksqd.org with questions or comments. And remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy. So let's get out there, folks.